So, as I said, how to protect the business. Uh, so, as I said, critical that you risk assess. You have a legislative obligation to do that. I- If you don't do it, you'll be asked to do it by the HSA, who'll give you a set time frame. Also, your defensibility in terms of a claim is absolutely non-existent if you don't have them in place. You need to be very proactive in terms of preventing slips. So for instance, training is critical, I suppose, in terms of, especially if you staff, staff, they're not focused on if there's a bit of water on the floor really. So they need to be conscious, and there needs to be training provided. There needs to be a good culture in place, good safety culture in place, in relation to, all health and safety related matters. But as I said, for the purposes of today's presentation, we're just focused on slip, trips and falls. Um, so, standard operating procedures. So for instance, I spoke about that earlier. You might have a procedure in place, a bullet pointed procedure that all staff are aware of. It's signed, it's up on the wall somewhere. Perhaps they would stand near it and beckon another staff member over. Perhaps they'd leave a wet floor sign down temporarily and get a mop and clean up that spill. Perhaps there's training provided. Perhaps you provide toolbox talks, which is like brief training on the potential consequences of trips and falls, just so everyone's conscious and aware. And this is what is expected of you. I don't make the rules, but that's what's expected of you from a legislative perspective. So risk assessments as well. Section 19 of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005, you legally have to have risk assessments in place. And again, it's really important in terms of your defensibility. Supervision and training. Training is very important. Risk assessments and these standard operating procedures training, they do actually prevent accidents. That's why they're required. Supervision, the manager's aware, to, instruct the staff if there's any sort of slip or trip hazard. And that goes for all health and safety related matters. But specifically, as I said, we're just talking about slip, trips and falls. Employee engagement, as I said, that really ties in with training and instruction. Perhaps you would have safety reps amongst the staff who you can liaise with and consult with in relation to health and safety related matters. Also a legal requirement under the same act I mentioned. Also safety culture. Is there a good safety culture in the business? Some companies have a great safety culture where staff are really engaged in it, and top to bottom, really, there's really good engagement and a really good appreciation of health and safety. There's other businesses where, potentially it's not a focus really for the business, and that's not a good strategy really, because as I said, your defensibility zero if you don't have like risk assessments in place, if you don't have if it's not properly controlled and monitored. Sorry, what time are we at there? Apologies. Sorry, I'll try and finish up soon. Sorry. Workplace inspections. As I said, the Health and Safety Authority of Ireland enforce health and safety legislation, 280 plus piece of legislation, and they're not going to care if you're busy and you haven't had time to really look at this. They'll give you a set time frame to complete certain actions, usually around 7 to 30 days, depending on how much work has to be done. Or they may not. They might issue a prohibition order right on the spot, prohibiting you from operating the business at all. So that's something to be conscious of. Accidents and incident investigations. So accidents do happen. You can do all the right things and they still happen, because something wasn't foreseeable, or things just happen, quite frankly. So that's something to be conscious of as well. Near misses and dangerous occurrences as well, they should be reported. Dangerous occurrences, anything like a fire or potentially a chemical release. They're defined in legislation. So these are the steps, and I'll run through them very briefly because I actually didn't realize the time there. Apologies. It's critical that first off, you fill out an accident investigation report form ASAP. Don't leave it a week later where it's not fresh in your mind and no one knows really what happened because they can't remember. Very important that it's done immediately. So you need to do the accident investigation report form. You also need to gather witness statements, preserve the scene, get any sort of, if there's any CCTV footage, if there's any sort of photographs. Potentially it'll be reportable to the Health and Safety Authority. You have a statutory requirement to do that. There's a whole list of circumstances. Generally, it's if the employee misses 3 consecutive days, or if it's a member of the public or a third person, it's if they're brought to hospital or they receive immediate medical attention. So you can see that slide there yourself. I won't run through everything there. Was first aid admitted. We're trying to get if anything comes up down the line, like the HSA investigate or your insurance company investigate, or there's a personal injury claim, there's a record of what happened. So, for instance, their nature of the injury. We know that the person, we've witnessed statements that he hurt, that Joe Bloggs hurt his right hand, but 6 months on from the accident, he said he actually hurt his back. You know what I mean? If you haven't recorded it, you've no way of really disputing that. That's why it's very important. That's just one example. So, potentially there would be remedial actions as well. You reviewed your risk assessment, and actually that accident would have happened if you had X control measure in place. So, yeah. And then also you would have an accident investigation conclusion. So you can see here we've something called a root cause analysis. It's not super complicated, but there's basically models in determining like the immediate cause, the underlying cause, and then the root cause of the accident.